Hello everyone, I am Bradley Sward, Associate Professor of Computer and Information Science at the College of DuPage in Glen Ellen, Illinois. And this video today is going to be using GameMaker Studio version 2.3. We're going to be using the drag and drop interface, and we're going to be making our own little Flappy Bird clone. Let me show you the end result of what we're going to be doing today. I have these graphics already taken from us, so like with this, bonus points if you know what character that is. It's more you're really old like me if you know what character or what video game this Flappy Bird character comes from. But you see I have a score down below. Oh shoot, I am terrible at my own game. I have to play with the physics, make this a little challenging. So obviously if I hit a pipe, I die. Every pipe I travel through, I get a point. If I go through the ceiling or go off the screen up, I die. And if I hit the ground, I die as well. So we got a lot going on here, and after 12 pipes, things start randomizing a little more. And of course, I only did enough to get this thing going. And of course, now that once you have the game going, all the little tweaks that you would need to go ahead and make this game as fun and challenging as possible is where we're going. But just to show you here, I hit the ground, I die. Go through the ceiling, I die. And everything else, just if I hit any pipe, I die along the way. So that's where we're going with this today. So let's just show you here. I'm just going to walk you through it. I'm going to talk about every detail along the way. I'm not going to just do it and talk today. I'm just going to, I already have it complete, and we'll discuss here. So I have 6 sprites that we're using, 1 room, 1 font, and 4 objects. So just right off the bat, that's where we're going with. And notice, maybe you noticed, maybe you didn't, that every graphic you see, I stole, quote unquote, borrowed from the internet. So let me just show you here. There's this background sprite. Edit that image. And what I did was I found a 720p graphic that looked like a Flappy Bird image. And I basically just cut out the bottom 60 pixels, which was the ground portion. So, and this was because if you notice, maybe you noticed, maybe you didn't, that I have what we call parallax scrolling going on here. The bottom and all the pipes are moving at a given speed. In this case, they're moving 4 pixels per game frame. But actually, the other part of the background, the buildings there are moving also, but much slower because they're further in the background. I believe that's moving at like 0.25 pixels per frame or something like that. So it's just to give it, the things closer to your eye move faster, the things further away. So I have that going and working for me, and I'll show you that when I get into the room, because I have multiple background and foreground layers on top of everything else. So the background sprite is just a 720p image with this removed. I don't even know if I really had to remove it, but I did it just because it should be that way. And then the foreground image is basically just the bottom part. Let me just, if I can edit this and go in there, you can see it's basically everything removed but the ground portion. And for this you definitely need this. I probably could have gotten rid of all this because this is bad when it comes to slower computers and slower machines, when it comes to all the calculations that have to be performed with blank transparent pixels. But just to get this thing on the screen and just to get the game working, at least in this case, I made my foreground sprite, and that's all there is to that. They're both 720p resolution. Oh, I guess this one isn't, but I guess it doesn't much matter. I could make this thing up in 720. It's not going to change anything in my game. If you notice the game was running smoothly already, and if I run this again, even when I change the graphic to 720, everybody's happy. Nothing looks any different, and just those empty, because it's blank pixels anyway. And so anyway, so moving on, that is my background. Those are the sprites for the background and the foreground. And of course, I need a Flappy Bird. And my question earlier, or whatever, was which game was this from? This is an old Sega game called Fantasy Zone. Fantasy with an F, not Fantasy Star. Fantasy, F-A-N-T-A-S-Y, Zone. I don't really know much about the game, but the games that were played, but I know that this little character, I wanted to use him. He's cute. He got 2 animation frames. And just so you can see here, I made my sprite 96 by 48 when it came to the size of everything, and we'll see in a little bit. I tinkered with the collision mask so that we don't have too many issues with collisions and things like that. And like it was just one of those little things where tweaks. If you don't, you could make this full image and you probably will never have an issue. But I just wanted to tinker with it. Okay, so 2 animation frames, and you notice that when it's running the character, it always looks like it's shooting off because it's using its little rocket to make him go forward, as opposed to the bird who's flapping his wings. So just, it's a rocket rather than a bird. Okay, so there's our Flappy Bird, and then the pipe itself. I just found a pipe online. Mine is 155 by 484, whatever that means. Just to say, collision masks. I made it the full image. So just sometimes GameMaker, especially with this version 2.3, sometimes GameMaker is not as happy setting all of this up for us, so we have to be careful. And every time we tinker, and we have to go back and make sure that everything went according to our plan. And I even had that come up a couple times where GameMaker didn't adjust this when I was moving things around, and it was causing issues when it came to collision detection, collision response, and all of that kind of stuff. Okay, so the other 2 parts of the game are basically just a death sprite. This is basically the ground. And I guess I didn't do it, but I could put it, I didn't think about it, but I put the death only on the ground. And so you can see it here in my room. We'll talk about it in a little bit. For whatever reason, I didn't think about putting it on the ceiling. I just used an outside room event for that, which I could very easily get rid of and just replace with another death object. But this one is the full width of the room and just the height of the ground itself. It doesn't even need to be this big, but just so you could see it when you put it into the room, I made it that big. And then the scoring part is just basically this one's 1 pixel wide and 720 pixels tall. And it's basically just, a little string sitting out there that when we touch, we basically, ding up the score and just go from there. So 6 sprites. Only one of them has an animation. Everything else is just a 1-frame deal going on here. And so, the pipe is a weird resolution, and everything else makes sense in what it's all going on. So let's take a look at the room. We're not even talking about the objects per se just yet, but we can kind of talk about them before we get going here. So notice I have 3 layers when it comes to my game. Normally we have a background layer and an instances layer, but this time around I added a foreground layer so that I can have this thing move at a different speed, and you can see this. The foreground layer is the layer just this. Did they show it? I move it and then won't let me do much with it. But the only thing going on inside of here is I set up my foreground. Oh, that's why I can't move anything around. It's my foreground sprite is the sprite that's being displayed at that layer, horizontally tiled, and it moves at -4 pixels per frame so that it wraps itself around. And you can see, if you just look at that one thing when the game runs here, you can see that it is going 4 pixels per frame, left to right, or right to left, or however you want to think of it, just along with the ship. And so that foreground layer is just this one little thing. The background layer is drawn at the complete background, and notice this is -0.25, much slower, because again, the reality is if you're following this character along, the background will move much slower because those things are much further in the distance. And so that's the only thing going on with these 2 layers is just the sprite that gets drawn, and then the instances layer. You can see here I've got a whole ton of stuff. I've got this ground death tile. I don't have anything for the ceiling, and the only thing, our main character is never going to actually physically move horizontally. It's only all the game objects that move along, which is not what it looks like when the game is running. But the reality is we're tricking the player into thinking that the only thing moving is the game character, but the reality is the game character is like the only thing that isn't moving. So I have 1 death object here at the bottom, and I guess I could make it a little bigger if I needed to. There we go. And so now it's along the entire ground. I brought this out a little bit so I could see it because of the way the layering is working out. And then obviously here's my Flappy Bird. I put him, about a quarter of the way into the world, the screen, and right around halfway. Maybe, we could tinker with it if you want to. And then everything else is just a series of the pipes and the scoring conditions. And so I set up my tiling to be every 50 or 150 or whatever it is, so that these are all evenly, or not evenly, they're evenly dispersed. They're equidistant apart from one another. And I put 12 of them on this, 12 of them here, and then 12 of them below, and they're all at the same Y values and everything, just to kind of get going. And again, if I'm making this for real, if I was going to make a real game out of this as opposed to just a video with you guys, I would probably tinker a lot more. But I got it. I got the basics. That's the whole goal, right? Is to teach you the basics. So I got 12 at the top, 12 at the bottom, and it's only one object. So you can actually go ahead. If I create a pipe, all I did was go into here. Well, let me get it. And then I can go ahead and rotate this thing 180 degrees. And now you can see that it's rotated, and it keeps the same behaviors. And that's all I did was I created 12 that were the right side up, and then 12 that were upside down. And then I just moved them around onto the screen accordingly. And I made sure that I put one of those scoring objects somewhere in here, and I put them like a third of the way in, so that you have to make it at least part of the way in before you touch this thing and you get credit and you get your point. So again, there's just 4 different object types in this entire game using these 6 different sprites. So I've got the Flappy Bird uses the Flappy sprite, 2 background images, 1 for the death sprite, so if I collide with that, I'm dead. And then we'll also collide with the ceiling, and then we have our pipes and our scoring objects. So that's what we've got going on when it comes to just setting up the room, using the sprites and using the 4 object types. And now, of course, the rest of it comes down to what are the interactions, what are the actions, what are the events these objects are going to need to make this game work properly. Okay, so obviously you would think that the most complicated object would be the Flappy Bird, which is absolutely correct. It's, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 different events. But again, they're not as complicated as you might anticipate. There's not a lot of code in any one of these things. Some of the other videos that do simple things have more code than the stuff that we're going to do here. So Flappy Bird uses the Flappy Bird sprite, visible. I didn't touch anything over here. Everything is just your normal, typical object setup. But then, of course, the events and the actions matter a little bit more. So let's see. When I create my Flappy Bird, I set the score to 0. And in the newer versions of GameMaker, score is on an individual object instance layer or level. It used to be global. It used to be a global variable for these things, but now it's set score for an instance, not set score globally. So you have to watch out for that. But I'm going to make sure I set score to 0 because when I start the game out, I might as well just make sure that I haven't scored any points yet. And of course, if I touch a scoring pipe, and now there's this extra if check, which I'll describe in a minute or two, but just understand though, if under all normal circumstances, if the Flappy Bird touches the scoring string, I get a point, and it's 1 score relative, so it adds 1 to whatever my previous score was. And again, I'll talk about this touched in a minute. It's just something so that the score can't go, you can't just run up the score by touching that thing over and over and over again. And then when it comes down to drawing the score, you can see here, I picked a font, so I just created a scoring font. I used on my machine, I have Poor Richard. I use default regular 20 when it comes to the settings. That's just the font that I was set, and of course you can set up however you see fit. And I use that font here when I say, okay, set the color, draw color to black, set the font to the scoring font, and then draw out pipe survived at X value 10 and 683 for the Y. That's just how it turned out. And now, you can see down there, there's my pipe survive, and there's my, and it adds the score to whatever you put in as your caption. So I don't ever have to worry about writing the score directly. GameMaker handles that for me. It just basically adds the score, appends the score as a string to the end of my caption. Okay, so that is the basics. Score is 0, add 1, and then draw it. And I put it in a draw GUI so that I don't have to worry about taking over the normal draw event, and I have to worry about drawing the Flappy Bird sprite myself manually. By doing a draw GUI, not only is that taken care of, but on the other hand, also like I'm drawing to the window of the Windows OS window rather than the game world itself. Draw versus draw GUI are completely different things when it comes to that. Draw is in the world space. Draw GUI is in window space. All right. If I collide with death, I actually run one line of code here, or 2 lines of code if you want to think of it. It's actually, we cannot, this is not a drag and drop, or maybe have they added it in the newest one? So debug message is not what I'm using here. This brings up that dialog box that tells you that the game is over when you die, right? So this guy right here, like this game over, and then the game restarts. I know you can't see it, but that's the whole point there. That shows that, and then I'm just using a room restart. You could use a drag and drop element for that if you don't want to write the code, but just to show you that you can, so it's the same deal. Let me just find the restart. Jump to start, rooms, restart room. I can just drag that down here. Run my 1 line of code, show my message, and then when they click OK, then restart the room. And let me die going down to the ground just to prove it. And there you go. So I wrote the code. I'm just used to writing the code. I've been doing this for long enough. But that's all I was doing when I hit the death. When I hit the outside room, I do the same thing. And if you want to go ahead and change it however you see fit. And the same with hitting the pipe. Those are the 3 different ways that the character can die. And so that's all there is to that. And so just think about all this stuff. We've done a lot of what we need to do already. Let's see, what's this step event? Oh, nothing like that just yet. And we've talked about our create event. We've talked about draw GUI. We've talked about death and pipe and outside room. So the thing left to do is what happens when I press that space bar? And you notice in my case, when I run the game, the character isn't going anywhere until I press a key. Like at this moment, when I first start the game, I do not have to worry about keeping the game going. But once I hit space for the first time, then I have to worry about keeping the thing afloat. It's on autopilot until then, and then I have to work my butt off to get this thing going. So there's no gravity effects until I hit spacebar. And you would think that this might be really complicated, but every time I press spacebar, this is all I'm doing. And I'm setting my speed, and notice I'm setting it relative, so I'm trying to move upwards, but gravity is pulling me down. And so these 2 values are great for tinkering with how you want the gravity to play out. And so what if I put 1, right? Like you really have to tinker. Even 1 is way too much. Watch, here he goes. Whoa. There's no way I can play this game. 1 is way too much. But if I do 0.1, oops, that's just another 1. Hold on, 0.1. Oops. Is my num block off? What the heck's going on? Am I not allowed to put a point there? What's going on? 0.1. There we go. Maybe I had it there. I just didn't see it. Okay, so now I go, and there it's way, so it's way too floaty now. The gravity. Well, maybe it is. Maybe it isn't. It depends on your design. This at this moment is way too easy. So you have to find a value, and I was just playing around, and I used 0.3. Maybe 0.25 is a little more fair. You just have to find your balance, right? Okay, but that's all there is to it. Gravity is going to automatically pull your speed downwards, and every time I press spacebar, I'm going to be trying to adjust my speed vertically in the up direction. And so gravity's pulling me down. I'm trying to go up every time I press spacebar. And once I get going, I never have to worry about turning the gravity off. If you do this in GameMaker, you usually turn the gravity off when you're on the ground, so you don't fly through the ground. It's crazy. I do not care for it. You'll see in my next video I have videos I will be making about platforming games and things like that. I don't even use GameMaker's gravity. I create my own. But that's all there was to it to get the character to move. And notice there's no horizontal movement. Everything else is moving. Oh yeah, I guess those, yeah, I haven't even talked about those objects yet. Is that the pipe itself, all it has is a create event that gets it going. Same with the scoring object. And the death object never has to move because it's right there at the bottom of the screen the whole time. So the death object doesn't do anything. The pipe object and the scoring object both just set themselves going. I still haven't talked about that touched variable yet. But the pipe and the scoring objects, when they go off the screen to the left, we just jump them back. And this is just something you have to tinker with on an individual basis. And I said on this case, if my x variable, if the x position of a specific pipe object is less than -500, so way off to the screen on the left-hand side, so it's gone past the player, just basically bring it back around. And this is where the randomization comes, where basically it just kind of moves itself around at 20 pixels up or down. And it works for both the pipes that are on the top and the bottom. So it could make the pipe easier, or it could make it more challenging over time. And it actually could make it eventually impossible to pass through because of the way, I mean, there's nothing holding it back from just making it smaller and smaller and smaller until you can't pass through. And so maybe we would have to write more code to make sure that there's a minimum distance between the two pipes. But for now, I don't care. This is just a first draft, and I'm not good enough to get that far in the game anyway. So, and I know there are plenty of people who could speedrun or just play this game to death if they cared enough to do that. But that's all I'm doing for the step event for the pipe and the scoring object. When it comes to movement is when it goes off to the screen to the left, bring it back around. And that's why there's only 12 pipe objects on top and bottom. But if I can make it past that, you will see that. Hope I can make it. I hope I can. My cadence is good enough. There we go. Come on, we're making it. And so the 13th pipe coming up here is just a repeat, and there you go. Everything is randomly moved around again and again. The longer you play, the more random things will get because of the way things are going here. And yep. And that's 20. This is my new record. Wow, aren't you guys excited for me? There we go, 24. And now things are even worse. Get harder or easier as we go. Okay. So one of the last things I want to discuss then is the collision with the scoring object. And I gave the scoring object an extra variable. And I called it touched. And I set it equal to true on the create. And then I also set it to false when it jumps back. And the whole point of this is, because this is an object that's just standing in, or just, in space, this character, the Flappy Bird character, can collide with this thing on more than one occasion as it's flying through. So like, if this thing is vertical and the Flappy Bird comes and hits it, the next frame it'll also hit it. And the next frame it'll also hit it. It'll do it more than one time, because the bounding box of this thing will continue to collide with the scoring object over time. And so all I wanted to do was use this touched variable to make sure that I only score it one time every time it comes around. So if the touched variable is false, I can set the score accordingly and then set that touched variable to true. And I go, oh, I touched it now. And then now when I come around the next game frame and I go, hey, did you touch this thing already? And you go, yes, I did. I will not get a second count for it. It'll go right through the if statement. And then every time I touch this thing, I will not get a second point again until the scoring object goes off the screen, comes back around, and I reset this thing so that I can score again. And that's the only thing keeping me back from one time going through one pipe and having it register 3, 4, 5, 10 times. Okay, so this is pretty much the whole game, And so the one really last thing is that little graphic animation with the step event here. And it's really as simple as just saying, on a frame-by-frame basis, I just found that if I take my vertical speed and I multiply it by -5, that'll give me a number of degrees, and it'll rotate that thing, and it'll make it look like it's going up and down. So just, you can tinker with that. You can tinker with this formula if you agree with me or not, or you can make it bigger or smaller or whatever. But I'm thinking it looks pretty good considering what it is, and it's real easy, right? There was nothing to it. It's just one little line of code, and it rotates my image, and it actually looks pretty good. So let's see, just to go through it. My death object has no code. My pipe object sets a horizontal speed, and when it goes off the screen, comes back around. My scoring object has an initial speed and this touched variable, and when it comes back around, it jumps back, and it also sets that touched variable back. And when it comes to my Flappy Bird himself, set the score to 0 when you create the thing. When you hit that scoring object, give me 1 point and play with the touched variable inside of other. So just to make sure you understand what that means is the touched variable is inside of the scoring object. It's not inside of me, the flapper. So I have to tell it to set the touched variable inside of the thing I collided with, which is the scoring object. Set that equal to true, the touched variable inside of here. Forgot about that one little detail. Everything else is self, but this one right here is not. It uses the other when it comes to which object to use this code on. And so, but that's it for touching the scoring. You touch the pipe, you die. You touch death, you die. You go outside the room, you die. You press spacebar, you set your gravity for the first time and forevermore. Set my vertical speed so that I can relatively go up a little bit, and that's why you keep hitting the spacebar to. So if you can tinker with these two to get it how you want, depending on how fast and how much you want them to slam on the spacebar to keep your character in the air. I draw the score through the draw GUI, and the step event handles the rotation. This is just a cool little effect, just to make it kind of look a little cooler than it's just kind of just standing there. But that's it. I die up top. I die down below. I die when I hit a pipe somewhere along the line. And then otherwise, I keep on going as far as I can go through. And let's see if I can talk while I do this and say that pretty much covers Flappy Bird in a nutshell. And now the rest is up to design and adding menus or whatever other little details you want this thing to have. So if I missed something or didn't describe something well enough for you, which is very possible, please comment below or send me an email at swardb@cod.edu, and I will definitely respond and get back to you about everything. And I'm going to be, for this class, this is the drag and drop class, I will be making a Atari combat game next. And for those of you in more advanced settings, I will be making a platform game. Depending on when you watch this video, if you watch it immediately, you'll have to wait. Otherwise, this video will probably be available to you in the next day of my life, but who knows when it comes to you guys. Well, look at this, 48, 49. I guess I just need to talk to you guys while I do this without thinking about code, and I can handle this. Maybe this game is way too easy. Who the heck knows? My 5-year-old son he cannot hit the button fast enough to make this thing work. So that is what it is. So anyway, thanks for sticking through my videos as always. Hope you had some fun. Hope you learned a little bit here about GameMaker and how easy Flappy Bird is to make. 67. And thanks again, everybody, and I'll see you next time.